About 50 miles. That's how far away Iran will be from Israel's border. Thanks for tuning in for your daily dose. Russia's special envoy to Syria today told journalists that Iran has agreed to withdraw its forces to 85 kilometers of the Golan Heights border with Israel. That's the last offer, he says. 85 kilometers is 52 miles. For a bit of international perspective for our New York viewers, that's the distance from my childhood home in North New Jersey, a town called East Brunswick, to Yankee Stadium in the Bronx, in New York. It's far, not that far, really. And remember, just a few weeks ago, during a meeting in Jerusalem, Prime Minister Netanyahu rejected Russia's offer to keep Iran's forces in Syria 62 miles away from the border, saying just a few days ago, 62 miles isn't far enough, and the IDF will attack Iranian troops and weapons as necessary. But Putin advisor Alexander Lavretnev today insisting to reporters Israel has agreed to a 52-mile buffer zone instead. Joining me now in studio, our senior Middle East correspondent, Mohammad Al-Kassim. Mohammad, we have a name. This is an official article saying that Israel will agree to 52 miles. Will they? Is the optimism perhaps misplaced? Israel has said in the past, we will not respect any buffer zone, period.
That's correct, but Israel is realistic, and let's be realistic too, that Iran, after investing arms and investing money and lives in Syria, it's not going to be easy, if anything, to ask it to leave Syria, and it won't leave Syria. So Russia, who's an ally of Iran and a stronger ally to Israel, is trying to play the mediator role, and it looks like they've been able to convince Iran to stay as far as 50 kilometers. This is 10 kilometers less than what we heard last week, and what Israel...
Russia's foreign minister was in Jerusalem just about a week ago, meeting with Netanyahu, and now the distance is actually shorter than what he proposed. So what changed?
Shorter by 10 miles. It's not much. Whether it's 100 miles or 50 miles, the missiles that Iran has, they can reach Israel even if they are in 200 miles away. So that's not the question. The question is Israel doesn't want to see Iranian forces in Syria, but also it's resigned to the fact that President Bashar al-Assad will be the president in Syria for the time being, and that means that Iranian forces will be on the ground. So anything they can get from Russia and from Iran, any distance, as long as it's not right on the borders, breathing down Israeli soldiers' necks, I think Israel will be okay with it for the time being, realizing that they're not going to be able to get Iranian forces completely out of Syria.
For now, there's Israeli leaders so far today staying mum about it. I guess the risk or a fear for Israel, of course, Israeli military advisors, perhaps not in uniform, or perhaps has been reported perhaps in Syrian uniforms, creeping closer, embedding themselves with Assad's forces. That's a concern too.
That's a concern, and I think that some of the Iranian forces on the ground in Syria, as well as the Shiite forces in Iran, have been working with the Syrian military, dressed in their uniforms, advising them, which technically they're part of the Syrian military, which can be on the borders with Israel. That's something that Israel has to talk to Russia about more and more and more. But for the time being, if this is correct, I would call this a surprise.